Hello guys and gals, and welcome! So we have some exciting news about the new charms. Everything has kind of come out, and if you haven't already seen, I've done a kind of like a more generalized video on all of the charms together and talked about them as a whole. But I wanted to do individual videos on each charm and talk about the potential of those charms, for each individual character, and also talk about how you could potentially utilize these charms to good effect. First off, let's go over the charm. Of course, this is the Flame Rift Grand Charm. The Flame Rift Grand Charm has a level requirement of level 75. It will take the monster's resistance and sunder it. The monster's fire immunity is sundered. Sundering is the process by which the monster's immunity, if the monster is immune, will be brought down to 95% resistance. That is all that it does. Does not do anything more than that. It also gives you a penalty for using this charm on your character of negative 75% fire resistance. As you can see, I'm currently at negative 38, and when I put the charm down, I'm now at negative 100, because negative 100 is the cap. Now, this charm brings with it a lot of interesting mechanics that could potentially be utilized. It's also important to note that 95% resistance is still pretty darn resistant. And if you are a fire damage character, you will often find that 95% is still relatively unkillable. So what can you do to counter the fact that the monster is still 95% resistant? And what can you do to counter the negative resistance that is on the item, right? So I've prepared a bevy of items for each individual character, and I want to go over these items and talk about their usefulness in combination with these new charms. My little barbarian here has literally every single item in the world on him, and we're going to talk about the items specifically for fire characters today. So the fire charm enables you to break the monster's resistance to 95%. Now, it's important to note that any item that obtains the effect negative enemy resistance has never worked on a monster that was immune to an effect. So if a monster is immune to fire, the negative 20% enemy fire resistance, for instance, on the Ravenlore Sky Spirit, does not work on that monster. So what the charm is allowing you to do is it's allowing you to be able to use an item like this to further decrease the monster's fire resistance and in turn increase your damage as a result. Now, as far as fire items go, we have a handful of items. We have Ravenlore Sky Spirit, which has a very nice negative 20% enemy fire resistance. It is, however, Druid only, so keep that in mind. We also have the Flickering Flame Helmet, which has a very nice amount of fire resistance, which varies between 10 to 15%. And on top of that, it also has a very nice Resist Fire Aura when equipped, which also varies between level 4 to level 8. And this could very effectively counter almost entirely the negative resistance that is present on the charm. We also have Bangsong's Lesson, which is negative 15% enemy fire resistance. Now, good luck getting your hands on a Bangsong's, but Bangsong's does have the negative enemy resistance on it as a mechanic, and that's why I brought it up. It does, however, vary, though, from I think it's 7 to 15%, which is pretty awful. On top of that, you can also make Flickering Flame in different options, like you could make it in a Barbarian helmet with plus to skills, or you could potentially make it in a Druid helmet with plus to skills. There is a lot of good options for Flickering Flame helmet, and for the users of the new Fire Charm, I definitely can see Flickering Flame helmet probably being what you're going to utilize with this particular charm. Then we also have the Weapon Obedience, which recently is now makeable in spears as well as polearms. And Obedience does have a pretty massive negative 25% enemy fire resistance, and is going to come in pretty handy for a myriad of melee fire characters. Like, for instance, a Fireclaw Druid would be the most extreme example that I can think of. Because obviously Fireclaw Druids have a relatively high amount of fire damage, and if they were using the fire charm in combination with this obedience, it would definitely make them far better off than they were before. And that's pretty much covers it for fire resistance items. There's really not like a super huge number of negative fire resistance items. The only one that I seem to be missing here is the Phoenix Shield, which is for some reason not on my character. But the Phoenix Shield, which I thought I had loaded in, is negative 28%. Of course, Phoenix is a lot harder to come by than something like Flickering Flame, and it is more specific to, you know, like a melee character than it is a spellcaster. Although you can certainly use it on a spellcaster to get the negative resistance, it doesn't necessarily offer a lot of benefits specifically to the spellcaster. Very, very good option for a Fireclaw Druid, though, to enhance your fire damage. Also could be useful for a Fire Blast Assassin. And that is unfortunately something that we do need to cover, is that this does not work with traps. It'll work with Fire Blast, because Fire Blast is not a trap, it's just an attack. But it does not work with minions, traps, or Hydras. It does not work with Hydras either, which is rather sad. So basically what we're looking at here is we have this amazing charm, but we need to actually find a way to utilize it correctly. Now you can also utilize other items, like for instance you could be utilizing an Infinity, which offers Conviction Aura, and you could be utilizing a Plague Phase Blade, which offers the lower resistance when struck. And the reason why these two could come in handy for something like this, or even Medusa's Gaze, which also offers lower resistance when struck, is that once the monster's resistance is broken like this, the Sundering actually sets the monster's resistance to 95%. It doesn't break the immunity. It's a different thing entirely. So Conviction can technically break an immunity, but it does so at a penalty. And this is a big issue with Conviction and lower resistance, is that they don't necessarily have their full potency against a monster that is immune to their effects. I actually have a formula here. I'm going to bring this up on the screen. So Conviction is negative 150% at its highest level. However, it suffers a 20% effectiveness versus immunes, which means it ends up at a 30% reduction versus an immune monster. However, it seems like, in my testing, that when the monster is sundered down to 95%, the Conviction and lower resistance no longer suffer the immune penalty, which means that they then can affect the monster at their full strength. At least that's what it seems like in my testing. Now, it could be wrong, or it could be a bug in the public test realm. And do keep in mind that these are not actually out yet. We are waiting for 2.5 to launch before we're going to see these. But it is definitely something that that has a huge advantage if you are utilizing these charms in combination with things like Infinity, Plague, or Medusa's Gaze, or maybe you just have a wand that has, you know, like lower resistance charges on it. That could also be beneficial. Now, what kind of characters could get really good benefit out of the the fire charm? Which what was the name of the fire charm again? It was a flame spirit, I think is what it was. The characters that could get good use out of the Flame Spirit is obviously pretty much any fire character in the game. Whether you are a Fire Boson, whether you are a Fireclaw Druid, a Fire Elemental Druid, whether you are a Holy Fire Paladin, a Fire Sorceress, of any build, because there's multiple Fire Sorceress builds, with the exception, of course, of the poor Hydra Sorceress, which got the shaft. But technically, if you do build a Fire Sorceress, a Flame Rift, that's what it was called. If you do build a Fire Sorceress, I mean, even if you build a Hydra Sorceress, you usually still have Meteor and Fireball and things like that, so it's not like it really matters all that much. You still got other skills that you could utilize with the Flame Rift. And, you know, it doesn't really end there. Like, any build that could potentially shoot fire damage that needs the ability to break fire immunities would get good effect from this particular item. And I do think, quite honestly, that a lot of fire builds that may have been a little less than amazing will probably see a resurgence during this patch. We will probably see a lot more Fire Bosons. We will probably see a lot more Fireclaw Druids, a lot more Fire Elemental Druids. Maybe even a lot more Enchant Fire Sorceresses, which is actually a really fun build, by the way, if you've never played around with it. Look up my video on the Demon Machine Crossbow if you want to learn about the Fire Enchant Sorceress builds. And, I mean, just in general, the charm opens up a lot of possibilities that, you know, otherwise would not be available. And One more item that I think I forgot to talk about that does offer negative enemy fire resistance is the Sorceress set Talrashas. Talrashas does have a 3-piece bonus on the orb of negative 15% enemy fire resistance. Before I forget, there you go. So negative 15% enemy fire resistance, negative 15% enemy lightning resistance. And that's a 3-piece bonus for the fire, and I think a 4-piece bonus for the lightning. So definitely something else that you could take advantage of with this charm to get those resistances lower. And if you'll forgive me for just a second, let's go to the calculator, because my quick math is awful. Yes, please make fun of my quick math. It's hilarious. Make fun more of quick math. My quick math is terrible. So let's do some quick calculations real quick just to get some ideas of what we're looking at. So while utilizing the Sundered charm, any monster that we come across that is immune to fire will be broken down to 95%, right? Which means that we're still going to have a pretty hard time actually killing those monsters. However, if we were utilizing several pieces of the negative enemy fire resistance equipment, we could potentially be reducing our resistance much further, right? So the monster would be a little more killable if we had the right pieces of equipment on. Which I also forgot to talk about the rainbow facet, which is a pretty common one. It's negative 5% fire resistance. And I had a whole bunch of those lined up on this character and totally forgot to even show them off because I am a derp. There are the fire, the charms as well. We've got tons of them. And so if you were running like a pretty decent setup, like say maybe you had obedience on, obedience is going to bring that 95 down to a very nice 70, which is not bad at all. And if you were to combine that with Flickering Flame, which has 15%, you could bring that down to 55%, which is pretty darn effective. And a monster who was before relatively unkillable by your fire damage would definitely be a hell of a lot easier to kill in this particular scenario. You could, of course, combine things like Phoenix, Raven Lore, Rainbow Facets, Talrashas, in whatever combination that you need to achieve the goal of bringing that 95% down low enough that you can exploit it. And I think that's really what's going on here with these charms is that yes, the charms do break the immunity for you, but that's not enough. Having a monster at 95% resistance is still going to be relatively unkillable. You're going to need other items to be able to bring that resistance down further, and you know, counter the negative the enemy resistance a little bit more to make it work. And that's why I think these charms are absolutely brilliant, because they force you to actually be ingenious and use items that are going to help you achieve the goal that you're looking for. Whether it is items that have negative enemy fire resistance on them, or whether it is items that have things like chance to proc low resistance, or items that have chance to, you know, like, well, not chance to, but conviction on them, or maybe it's an item like Medusa's Gaze that you throw in your offhand slot to get free lower res on a regular basis. But whatever it is, you're going to be combining multiple effects in multiple pieces of equipment, and it's going to change the way that you build your characters a little bit, because you're going to be trying to work in as much negative enemy fire res as possible in combination with the charm. Now, we also have the other thing going on here, which is the massive negative enemy fire resistance. Now, there are tons of ways that you can potentially counter negative enemy fire resistance. And I feel like it's important to talk about that really quickly just for giggles, is that how would you potentially counter negative 75% fire resistance? Well, one of the most easy ways that I can think of right off the top of my head is the Flickering Flame Helmet, which offers the rather large resist fire aura. On top of this, you could also potentially utilize items in the game that have ridiculously high specific resistances. Like, for instance, Laying of Hands has 50% fire resistance on it. Lower level items, like for instance Beverard's Keep, has 75% fire. You know, in general, you shouldn't have too much trouble countering that resistance if you try. On top of this, you're also going to find that the single resistance charms are going to become more valuable in general than the all resistance charms. So in situations where you're going to be utilizing something like this, which is going to bring down your resistances rather heavily, all resistance isn't really going to be what you're looking for, because all resistances is just going to beef up the 3 that you don't necessarily need, while unfortunately not bringing up the one that you do need to bring up heavily, on that particular character. So what you're going to be looking for instead is actually things that are probably a little overlooked at this particular point, which are the individual resistance charms. So we're going to see a spike in use of individual resistance charms, and most notably is the specific 11% smalls. You're going to see a lot of use of the specific 11% smalls. Now, granted, these can spawn with other modifiers on them, but notice that this particular character, they already did it. She is currently using a specific 11, 11, a 10, and an 11, all on the same character. And why is she doing that? Because it counters out the negative resistance that she has from the cold charm. So when she puts the cold charm in her inventory, she's getting a massive negative 75%, and each one of these cold charms is providing a bump in her resistances, which makes her a little bit less ridiculously, cold effective. And that brings us down to negative 92%, because we have a pretty hefty penalty with this particular charm. So if you were to use all resistance charms in the place of these, that would be 5, 10, 15, 20, right? So 5, 10, 15, 20 versus 11, 22, 33, 44. So we're looking at a pretty big difference between having 4 singular resistance charms versus one all-encompassing one. Another thing that we probably need to talk about is the fact that the fire charm is definitely going to amplify the negative fire resistance coming from Spirit. So if Spirit doesn't actually provide a negative effect, but it does not provide fire resistance. It's the one resistance that the Spirit Shield does not provide. So if you are a fire character, the Spirit Shield is going to amplify the negative fire res from the charm, which is certainly not a good thing. I think I've covered just about everything with the Flame Rift charm, and as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos. Be sure to tune in for my coverage of the other charms as well, or check out my abbreviated video on the full Monty. As always, thanks for watching, and if you want to keep watching, be sure to hit that subscribe button.